I've played the Mountain Thane warrior with the warrior rework in the alpha, and the gameplay is amazing. We're gonna talk about the talent rework, how the actual hero talents feel to play, because we did have access to all of them, and it's all going to be with some dungeon footage in the upcoming expansion, so strap in because we are going in. In the short amount of time that we have had to test the War Within alpha, I went into warrior and tested all of the hero talents and all the 3 specs, but the most amount of gameplay that I was able to get my hands on was on the prot warrior Mountain Thane. Of course, I wanted to do Fury, Slayer, and Arms, and Colossus as well, but didn't really get the chance to get into it. Early alpha, you know, things happen. We didn't have a lot of time on our hands, but we will have them soon once they give us access to alpha in the next couple of days, hopefully next couple of weeks or so. In terms of the actual Mountain Thane talent, since it is the one that I've had the chance to test the most, it feels incredible, especially if you're new to hero talents. This is one of the best specs to get a sense of how it works, because it is more or less passive, as in you still play your spec the way you do, whether it is Fury or Prot Warrior, you still play it the same, you still rotate your generators and your spenders in most of the same way, but there are some key moments in your rotation where it all feels incredible whenever your big thunderclaps turn into thunder blasts and then you destroy everything around. There are a couple of things that make the hero talents a little bit better, since we are going to talk a little bit before we go into the warrior rework, that I want to point out. First of all, the Storm Shield choice node that you have in the Mountain Thane in opposition to Storm Bolts does bring back Intervene as part of your identity. Now, this is most likely going to be good regardless if you play Fury or Protection, because AoE Storm Bolts is something that we're going to get into once we talk about the class talent tree rework. But having the option to intervene and provide a magic absorption shield to a party member is an incredible utility that is definitely going to be helpful both in Mythic Plus and in raids, and it might actually give all of the warrior specs, well, now, because Arms doesn't get to be a Mountain Thane, but Fury and Protection a better reason to get invited into a group, considering that Intervene is on a fairly short cooldown, essentially 30-second cooldown that you can give an absorb to a party member. Because remember, this is very similar to how the Evokers have the pick me up and fly me somewhere around and drop me off and leave a shield on my face to absorb the incoming damage. And since magic damage is most likely what everybody else besides the tank is going to be hit by, this is a particularly strong talent and it will influence your more or less gameplay. And seeing as how Intervene has been pretty much a protection warrior mechanic, although other specs have access to it as well, now you're going to be playing it with Fury as well, because you probably won't want to take AoE Stormbolt, since most likely you're going to be running with Shockwave if AoE Stun is something that you want. Not to mention AoE Stormbolts is definitely not going to be picked in raids anyway, since there's no real reason to AoE Stun in raids. And since you probably already know the Mountain Thane talents and they've been up for a while, it's no secret here, nothing necessarily changed yet in the War Within alpha. I won't be going into all of them, but I want to talk about one other thing that you will feel as the meat of the spec once you actually get to play, and that is the Thunder Blast talent. What this means essentially is that Shield Slam and Bloodthirst have a 20% chance to grant you Thunder Blast, stacking up to 2 charges. Thunder Blast makes your next Thunderclap become a Thunder Blast, and it deals Storm Strike damage. This also is activated while you pop Avatar, so these Thunder Blasts are Giga Thunderclaps that just do a lot of damage. It lights up on your bars, it looks really cool, and it does a lot of damage. It explodes the ground around you, and these are probably the highlights that you're going to be having as a Mountain Thane. Sure, Mountain Thane has a lot of cool mechanics that work around and behind the scenes of the talent tree that's not super obvious in a way where maybe Slayer might be, with a lot of Bladestorm procs that are very visual. This just gives you a lot of power under the hood. It's like having a shitty looking car. It's basically like the Fast and Furious movies, where the car looks shit, but damn that engine though. And of course, this will most likely change through the course of the alpha and beta by the time the expansion gets released. but it's only going to get better from here, and it feels incredible to play with. Now, this all comes as a package deal with the class Rework, and since I've had most experience on Protection Warrior because we wanted to do some content, and I was the only one willing to tank, so I'm going to speak from that perspective, and I'm not going to touch too much on the Fury and Arm style on Rework. Those are going to be coming in separate videos on their own once we get more time to test in the alpha. But as far as protection, the class Warrior Rework, which is a good time to talk about it as well, it does affect, of course, how you build your Mountain Thane. Then there are a lot of good stuff that happened because Warrior class tree has had some design issues, and unfortunately it still has some design issues, and I don't know if the rework necessarily fixed all of the problems. It did fix a whole bunch. First of all, we have a lot of spells that are now baseline, and some of them that have gone. Berserker Rage, as an example, is currently baseline for all warriors, which is particularly great because it's a core identity. It's something that's so niche that you're probably never going to deliberately talent into it, since having to deliberately fear a target or taking in a fear is not something that you go through in terms of the overall combat design of World of Warcraft. It happens in dungeons like Atal Dazar, but we've just finished the season with Atal Dazar, so that's likely not going to come back anytime soon. So might as well have it baseline and not have to feel like, oh, I could have talented into this one for this one mechanic. But with the rework, there's a lot of talents that have been swapped around, so I'll give you the general feel of how the talent tree looks like. I mean, you can see it on the screen right now, and you can browse it on Wowhead as well. What's been done that's really good is actually make it more concise. You have a row of utility, a row of mobility, a row of defensives, and then you have the throughput, the damage that comes in. So it feels like it's in line with the other classes that are more or less designed really well. And it doesn't feel like it's all jumbled up and all over the place. That makes it easier to actually take defensives and utility and CC options without feeling like you're always going to have to sacrifice throughput, which is great. This is definitely something that Warrior needs, and it is on the right track because it is not quite there. And since the topic of the video is Mountain Thane, Stormbolt is something that you're probably not going to pick because Shockwave is just right there. It's no longer a capstone, and you're probably going to use Shockwave as your sources of stun because Stormbolt comes as a counter node to intervene while building your Mountain Thane, and you cannot pick both. I mean, you could probably pick both, but you're losing a lot of value since the choice node that influences either AoE Stormbolts or the Intervene shield is obviously a choice node, that you can only buff one of them, and Intervene just takes the cake in terms of how good it is. And AoE Stormbolts is more or less a redundant talent since you're just going to always have the option to take Shockwave unless they buff the AoE Stormbolts talent a little bit more so that you feel an incentive to take that over Shockwave, since you're probably never going to take both because there's just too much stunts to go around. You don't need all of these stunts since you're never going to be playing alone. You're likely going to have other party members that will provide the AoE stun situation. And more important than anything, you're not taking either of these two talents in raids, so Intervene kind of takes to be a default. Now, I don't know if this speaks to the lack of options that you might have in the Mountain Thane hero talent tree. I don't know if the Storm Shield and Storm Bolt choice node needs to be redesigned, reworked, rebuffed to kind of give you an incentive to pick Stormbolt. I think it would only really work if Stormbolt also receives a little bit more damage, but then again, if it becomes a throughput talent, it might be a bigger problem and you're never going to take Intervene then. So it kind of makes one or the other dead in this sense. And to round up the first half of the talent tree, I'm seeing very similar situations to what Paladins and Hunters had in the past, where there are just way too many nodes that become to be a little bit too expensive, nodes like Crushing Force or Overwhelming Rage, because we want to get to specific nodes, stuff like Reinforced Plates. And although you're a Mountain Thane, you're probably going to have an easier time getting to Reinforced Plates because you're going to be taking Thunderclap whether you are in raids or dungeons. But if you're not a Mountain Thane and you're still a warrior, you're probably going to be forced to pick either Thunderclap or Shockwave, which are usually things that you don't really care about if you are a Slayer or a Colossus. There are definitely problems with the talent tree, and especially for Mountain Thane, the left-hand side of the talent tree is still filled with dead talents. Second Wind is probably never going to be picked. It's definitely not for Protection Warrior, and there aren't encounter designs made in such a way where you can get consistent value out of second wind because you're just not taking damage for a long time. And if you're not taking damage for a long time, enough time for this talent to proc, you're either just using your impending victory or you're just getting healed by your healer. So second wind is kind of a dead talent unless they make it work while you're also taking damage and take that restriction away. That might make it better or make it proc after using a specific ability. On the choice node with Cacophonous Roar and Menace, it's also a dead talent. It's way too expensive. It's way too out of the way. Maybe it's good for PvP. Maybe that's the intention for it. But as far as a Mountain Thane goes, you're never going to get to this point because it's just way too expensive to do and you don't have the points to spare to get either of these two choices. Similar with Wrecking Throw and Shattering Throw. Exact same situation as above, although cool concepts and a cool identity for warrior in general. Wrecking Throw and Shattering Throw are things you're never going to pick because we're getting to the second part of the talent tree, which is incredibly expensive. Sure, we get the throughput kind of all centralized in the bottom part of the talent tree, but while we've had a similar situation with Assassination World, where to get to your capstones you have to spend a lot of points. 2 points into Cruel Strikes, 2 into Wild Strikes, or 2 into Endurance Training, or 2 into Armored to the Teeth, while you still have stuff like, especially for Mountain Thane Prot Warrior, one-hand weapon specialization, which you will definitely want. You will definitely want double time. You'll definitely want seismic reverberation, so it's just a lot of points to get down to the capstone. Which, just to get to the capstones, might not be that big of an issue because Assassination has made it obvious that you can have heavier price to pay to unlock your big capstones, but the fact that stuff like Berserker Shout and Piercing Howl are also just before these 2 points makes it so that picking these 2 points makes it incredibly unlikely to ever get any other talents because you will always need to save enough points to unlock definitely Avatar and Unstoppable Force, which are 100% locked in if you play Mountain Thane, and you can probably have a toss-up between Thunderous Roar and Spear. It probably might come down to the damage output that either of these two will provide, so it's mostly a simming situation. And on that front, you might not have that much of an option unless they're very close together, and then you can just pick whatever you like best. The rework still has a lot of issues that have been addressed in past class reworks, so this is still hopeful that by the end, when War Within actually launches and you get your hands on your Mountain Thane warrior or your warrior in general, you will get a much better iteration of these talents, because I'd like to remind people this as well. When Dragonflight Alpha and Beta launched with the talent reworked, all of the talents, or none of the talents made it to the live game, and definitely no talents survived all the patches up until 10.2. So it's very reassuring to know that the talent tree and the rework in general is going into a nice direction. Also, the fact that the talents really match with the Mountain Thane hero talent, so you don't feel like you're super locked in, with probably the exception of Stormbolt, which is an issue, which I would like to have Storm Bolts thrown all around, but Shockwave is just gonna do that for me, so that's likely not gonna happen. If those things are addressed, this could be looking a lot better, but what you can know for sure is that you're gonna have a lot of fun blasting with Mountain Thane in the War Within, and the alpha just started and there's so much more stuff coming in, and we already made a video on it straight from the event that we were invited to, that you can check right here and see exactly what you should be expecting from the early stages of War Within if you are interested in testing or just watching future content on our channel.